In a huge aircraft hangar, not far from X's Silicon Valley headquarters, hardware engineer Matt Forkin and his team had been working on a stealth project. Only a handful of people outside of X know anything about this project, which we're making public for the first time.
Okay, I'm doing some venting of gas just to make sure everything is fresh and moisture has been released.
Try to picture it. A 27,000 square foot space. You could fit a jumbo jet inside. Right in the middle is a collection of large tanks and cylinders, surrounded by pumps, gas tanks, monitoring equipment, and power supplies. They sit underneath a steel structure the size of a small house that is supporting a vacuum chamber. And next to this structure, a little room full of computers.
So here we are entering the screen room. All that clicking sound is the sound of many small copper fingers creating an electrical tight seal between the door and the rest of the room.
With the door closed, this little room is isolated from electrical or magnetic waves, which is important because this room is also home to some very sensitive monitoring equipment.
We have a number of high-speed oscilloscopes, which we're turning on, and they gather the data from all of our probes at as fast as 1 billion data points per second. But they're all controlled by the LabVIEW PLC computer system, which Brian is turning on right now.
And now it's time for Brian Adolph to run the test.
I'm now going to set the power supplies. We'll enable the high voltage trigger. Then we're going to lift the relays. We can watch the voltage and current waveforms. And now it's fully charged and we can trigger.
Wait for it, it's loud. Matt's experimental setup has been designed to answer a decades-old mystery, a mystery which could unlock the solution to one of our biggest global challenges.
Humanity has a growing appetite for energy. Use of energy has allowed us to increase the quality of life for billions of people. And as time goes on, hopefully we can elevate everybody to a higher standard of living. To do that, we need a lot more energy to continue to be a high energy use, high quality of life species.
Welcome to the Moonshot Podcast. I'm your host and captain of Moonshots, Astro Teller. In this series, we go behind the scenes at X, Google's Moonshot factory, to meet the people working to solve some of the world's hardest problems with radical creativity and breakthrough technology. Energy, where it comes from and how it's delivered to our homes, businesses, factories, hospitals, schools, might just be the ultimate moonshot. The right technologies could improve the lives of all 8.2 billion and counting people on Earth. But it's not simple. Here at X, we've tried a lot of energy projects, and some of them have been a little bit out in left field.
How do you capture light and store it and then release it was always a problem at the back of my head.
This is Will Regan. He's a physicist and was a project lead here at X before he left in 2023. And I remember he was always coming up with interesting ways to try to improve the energy system. One idea was triggered by something fascinating he'd read about fireflies.
When they glow, it's actually shockingly efficient at producing that orange or reddish light. They're about 50% efficient at converting chemical energy to light.
And Will had also observed something about solar cells. Just like what you'd find in solar panels on the roof of a house, they have a sweet spot, an intensity of light at which they produce energy with maximum efficiency.
So if you combine those two things together, if you had a chemical way of storing light and could really efficiently release it, and it's right close to the band gap of the solar cell, you could have 90% efficient energy conversion.
So what if you could store energy in a liquid, just like a firefly does? And what if, in the right conditions, that energy could turn on and glow at just the right wavelength to perfectly power a solar panel? Then you've got a really efficient way of storing and releasing energy. It's almost like a brand new form of battery, but one that never wears out. For a proof of concept, Will literally took some glow sticks.
because that's an easy way of buying stored light. Got a solar cell that was about the energy of the light coming out and hooked it up to a little motor and tried to power a little car. So that was our proof of principle.
You would have a bunch of solar panels sitting in a box. That wasn't going to be very expensive, with a liquid in it that had the capacity. If you put electricity in, it would charge up. And then when you triggered it, it would release its energy in the form of photons, and you'd close that cycle.
It was really enticing because there's a lot of different ways that chemicals can store and release light. There's the phosphors, there's things like the firefly reaction, luciferase. There's like stressed molecules that can go from one state to another and release kind of low energy light. There were kind of solutions for every property we needed, just not in the same molecule.
So, and my memory of why we stopped was because, while we had everything except the liquid, in order to get the liquid, we would have had to go do basic science.
Yeah, I mean, maybe this podcast is a good forum for all the aspiring chemists to try to think of a solution there.
While we felt that X wasn't quite the place to do the basic science to discover a special light-emitting liquid, sometimes a project comes along that warrants scientific experimentation. Before he came to X, Will worked at ARPA-E, the Advanced Research Projects Agency for Energy. It's a U.S. government agency tasked with funding and directing the discovery of outlier energy technologies.
So I went to ARPA-E really to boil the ocean, like find everything that's out there, look at every corner of energy. It was this, decades of pent-up research that the whole U.S. community had been working on.
Will literally read thousands of scientific papers and grant proposals, looking for new science that might lead to novel ways of capturing, storing, and releasing energy.
I worked on solar programs, fusion programs, energy efficiency programs. What are the ones that could have the most impact if they could work?
One problem really stood out to Will.
That was started with this concept that had been looked at by the Naval Research Lab in the 1980s. They saw some unexpected results and never were able to sort of pull the threads on that and figure out what was going on.
Will was intrigued, and when he told me about it, so was I. These felt like the kinds of threads that we could pull here at X. So what was this 40-year-old mystery? Nuclear fusion.
Fusion creates the energy that powers the stars.
This is Matt Forkin again. He's been heading up X's fusion moonshot, which we call Blixt.
All of the things that happen on Earth are essentially resulting from fusion energy, either from our star or from earlier stars that had released their products into the universe. Fusion is the process through which small atoms, usually hydrogen or types of hydrogen, are squeezed together and become larger atoms like helium. If we look at the amount of mass in the two starting nucleuses and in the final resulting one, there is a little bit less mass in the final one.
This missing mass is where the energy comes from. It's released during fusion. As an aside, fusion was a big part of my grandfather, Edward Teller's legacy, so I grew up hearing about it over the dinner table. Think about it in the context of Albert Einstein's famous equation, E, energy, equals m, mass, times c squared, the speed of light squared. So when you multiply that small amount of mass lost by the speed of light squared, which is a huge number, you get a massive release of energy. The trouble is, fusion is not an easy reaction to force. It takes a lot of power in the form of temperature and pressure. Because hydrogen atoms usually repel each other, it's actually far harder than splitting an atom to jam two atoms together. And so, after 7 decades of trying, humanity is still struggling to find stable, controlled ways that get more energy out than you put in. Most of the world, when it goes looking for fusion, is looking to create that mushing together of those hydrogen atoms in a way that has traditionally been extraordinarily expensive. You have ended up spending the last couple of years of your life doing something incredibly different.
We call it Z-pinch fusion. The Z-pinch approach was actually one of the first processes that folks looked at when considering if fusion was possible. In some regards, kind of inspired by a lightning bolt.
The particular bolt that inspired the Z-pinch approach struck a lightning rod in New South Wales, Australia in the late 1800s. After the strike, the thick but hollow rod looked as if it had been crushed by the hand of a giant. Some reaction, had caused the rod to collapse in on itself when the lightning hit. In 1905, Australian scientists confirmed that the electrical power of the strike had created an electromagnetic field which squeezed the rod so powerfully it made it crumple like putty in a hand. This is the pinch effect. And so, Matt and his team are using a huge pulse of electricity to create an electromagnetic field, except instead of a metal rod...
In our case, we extrude a target or a fusion fuel in the form of a frozen wire of hydrogen.
The wire is only around 150 microns thick, which is right at the edge of what's possible to see without a microscope, about the thickness of a human hair.
And we put a huge pulse of energy, electrical energy, through that wire. And as the current flows through the wire, it creates its own magnetic field around the wire, which squeezes it down or compresses it.
Just like that lightning rod, except as well as compressing the wire,
as that current flows through that fuel wire, it heats it up. And so it goes from this very cold, frozen wire to essentially liquid and then gas, and finally to plasma, the fourth state of matter, which is almost like you can think of it as an outward explosion. And we're trying to have a balance of these two forces, the outward explosion of the plasma and the inward force squeezing by the magnetic field to heat and pressurize this fuel to the point where we get to fusion conditions, like what happens inside the sun.
People looked at it back in the 80s, and then it was abandoned. Why would we try it again?
Very early on, folks realized that there were instabilities that would cause the plasma to tear itself apart way before it could get hot enough for long enough to reach those fusion-relevant conditions. And most experiments had shown no matter what one would do, a Z-pinch would lead to these instabilities. And so we couldn't get it hot enough, long enough to matter. However, there have been a number of experiments that were done, including some by Los Alamos National Lab and the Naval Research Lab in the 80s and 90s, that seemed to show that using a frozen wire as the target, as a starting fuel pellet, behaved in a curious way. And they called it anonymous stability, where they saw in their experiments their plasma remaining uniformly like a wire or a column. And they couldn't fully explain it, but it seemed to indicate that there might be a path forward here. Those teams and other teams tried to scale up and replicate those results, and they didn't see the same stability.
Eventually, Z-pinch fusion with frozen hydrogen was abandoned, but the field was left with this mystery.
Why were two experiments able to show stability or something that looked like stability, and then other experiments later couldn't replicate those results? The advantage of being able to do this experiment now is that we have a lot more advanced diagnostic tools, including much faster oscilloscopes, better simulation tools to help support the work, and also some specialty cameras that allows us to take images of the plasma at a billion frames per second for only 8 frames, but still, it's incredible tool to allow us to see what's going on at a very zoomed in micro scale.
You're saying these tools didn't exist back in the 80s when they got this initial good-looking data.
Exactly.
Here at X, we're looking for very high reward to risk ratios in our projects. So imagine someone offered you 2 lottery tickets. The first one has a 50% chance of winning $100, so you can calculate its expected value as 50% of $100, so $50. The second lottery ticket only has a 10% chance of winning, but the potential prize is $10,000. So with the same formula, 10% of $10,000, the expected value is $1,000. That second lottery ticket is the one we should pick because while your chances of winning are lower, the upside from winning is so much larger it more than compensates for the risk. And of course, the reward X is chasing isn't just financial. We're looking to have an outsized positive impact for the world. And chasing that takes the same kind of smart risk thinking if you want to tackle really global problems.
Fusion has the possibility of generating very energy-dense, reliable power that could be put pretty much anywhere in the world, is relatively safe, has no long-lived radioactive waste. Essentially, it could be a power source that would solve all of our problems. And we have a tremendous amount of fusion fuel. In our oceans and in all our lakes and the waters of the earth, we have an isotope of hydrogen called deuterium. And we have tens of billions of years of that fuel source. The sun is expected to burn out in about 5 billion years. So essentially, we have an unlimited amount of energy available for humanity's uses if we can unlock this new technology.
And so, working with a deep bench of scientists as advisors, Matt and a small team of ex-engineers came up with a plan to test the Z-pinch approach. First, they spent 2 years seeing if they could disprove the hypothesis using simulation. But when the simulations were inconclusive and even a little promising, it was time to see how fast and how inexpensively they could build their own fusion machine to get the next level answers to their questions.
And then over a year, we machined all those parts and put them together, building this facility in Alameda, California, just across the bay from San Francisco.
What was that like the first time you made a lightning bolt that went through this frozen heavy water and got this bright flash of light? That must have been pretty intense for you and the team.
It was incredibly exciting. We had spent so many long hours, what felt like banging our heads against the wall, trying to get this system with so many layers of complexity, all of those parts and pieces working together in unison.
Planning and building the setup took Matt and his team over a year, running tests and more computer simulations, ensuring that the experiment was safe to run.
Our process happens on the order of tens of nanoseconds, so billionths of a second in time. And in that time, we're putting in hundreds of thousands of kilovolts, hundreds of thousands of kiloamps. It's kind of a crazy combination of incredible power, incredibly short timescales. Our plasma is incredibly hot, tens or hundreds of thousands of degrees, whereas our fuel pellet we put in to begin with is very cold, like 4.5, 5 degrees Kelvin, almost absolute zero. The extremes in the project are mind-boggling and humbling, and we weren't sure if we were going to be able to achieve the experimental conditions.
And then one day in December 2023, they did all their safety checks, charged up the power bank, extruded the wire, and took the first shot.
When we had that first successful shot, the whole team celebrated and were literally jumping up and down and yelling. And it was a moment of incredible excitement and satisfaction.
So over the 12-ish months that followed that, culminating about now, you've done a few hundred plasma shots where you had heavy water and you put a lightning bolt through it, right? And you've learned a lot. What was your conclusion by the end of last year?
We have seen a bunch of interesting things, some that we expected and some that we didn't expect to see. But on average, with our modern tools, we can see there is an instability growing from an early stage. And because of that, we don't believe this has a path to a power plant. It's probably possible to get partway to fusion-relevant conditions, but not far enough to actually make more energy than we put into the system. So the decision has been made to wind the project down and also to publish and share the results of our experiment in the hopes that that will contribute to the knowledge of the plasma physics field as a whole.
Hindsight's always 20/20, but was this a smart experiment to run? I mean, you and the team have wisely and bravely said we should shut it down, and we're doing that. But I'm now asking you to look backwards. How are you feeling about it now?
I feel a lot of gratitude to have had the opportunity to have run this experiment. I think the likelihood that this would lead to a power plant was very low. For me, I always had the number in my head of around 1% likelihood of success. If success is, this is technology that could scale. But the potential impact is tremendous. If fusion could work and work at a scale where the cost is competitive with or below, say, the cost of fossil fuels, then the potential is tremendous for humanity. It could completely change our energy infrastructure, and through that, completely change our economic system. So the potential impact, the reward was so high that it was worth taking something that we knew was a very low likelihood of success. So I think for our team and for X, and perhaps for the research field as a whole, I do feel this was a smart bet to place. We answered this mystery that had been kind of left in the field in a way that I think brings a sense of clarity and closure. We can put this to bed and then move on to the next new project, the next experiment.
I'm so proud of Matt and his team. Having the guts to try something risky, a 1% chance of success, and being honest when the evidence starts to show that it isn't the right path is a huge part of taking moonshots. You can't explore at the outer reaches of technology without failing again and again. And while it's time to retire this approach to fusion, there are lots of other efforts being tried and tested by private companies, governmental agencies, academic institutions, and international partnerships around the world with some promising results. Some of these, I hope, will scale up. And maybe one day, we'll take another shot at it too. Leveling up the energy system isn't just about looking for new sources of energy. It's also about how energy moves around, and specifically how electricity moves.
The first thing you told me was, if you want to stick your finger in that light socket, you should go talk to a lot of people who have tried this, especially around here.
Ivo Stavorik is vice president and lieutenant troublemaker here at X, and he wanted us to look at something so big, so massive, it was hard to know where to start. You came to me and you wanted to look at the electric grid.
We had done a lot of work in energy storage. These are big hardware projects, but like there was this other limitation that I could see showing up, which was like, how are old systems, like a 100-year-old grid like in our country, is going to be able to plug in these newfangled things? We're doing the edges. I came to you and I said, like, who's managing the middle?
In thinking about other moonshots, we kept colliding into, oh, we can't do this moonshot because the grid is just not up for it.
Yeah.
Until you said, what if we actually try to help fix the grid?
And all these people kept telling me like, hey, don't get into this space. It's impossible. I went to go talk to 80 utility companies with some team members that I'd co-opted to work with me on this journey of discovery. And what we learned was, hey, if you're going to go work with them, you can't be just like a typical disruptive startup from Silicon Valley. It's like, how do I work with you? Because we got all these new technology going to come online. What can we do to help you do that? How can we work together? And our first 6 partnerships were with utility companies, which kicked it off.
We called it Tapestry, our moonshot for the electric grid. We're going to hear more from Ivo later in the series, but for now I want to introduce you to Paige Crahan, General Manager of Tapestry. And you might be asking, so what's going on with the grid? The lights are on, we can charge our cars, power our microwaves, TVs, laptops. What's the problem?
This is humankind's largest machine, the electric grid. There are 80 million kilometers of electric grid around the world, and it is still running the way it was designed when we invented electricity in the 1880s. So the state of the electric grid is that the things that humans need from electricity have far surpassed what we had in our minds in 1880. We're not just turning light bulbs on and off. We're running manufacturing plants. We're powering our computers. We're doing that in a world where we want to put electricity into the grid. With our solar panels on our home, we want to take it back out of the grid. We're doing that in the world where the climate has changed so much that the physical equipment that we have relied on for decades is prone to the storms and the temperature changes. I mean, it's just like cataclysmic, the things that are getting thrown at humankind's largest machine, which still largely runs how it was invented 130 years ago. So that to me, I was like, that is the moonshot. That is the moonshot. And it's like, where do you start? I hope this is a 6-hour podcast. Is it?
It'll be more, actually.
Okay, good.
You know, humanity went from broadcast media A few newspapers, a few television stations, and local radio stations, but it was all one to many. To a world of social media where it was many to many. And that jump happened partly because the internet facilitated that jump. What you're partly describing is that we need to move from a one-to-many kind of broadcast of electrons to more of a marketplace of electrons. But we have to use the same infrastructure. We don't have the equivalent of the internet as a new substrate to build the new paradigm on.
It's a great analogy, and to up the ante, the stakes in the broadcast analogy, if your friend's rerun doesn't make it to you, someone makes a mistake, man, that's disappointing. You're going to have to watch something different. If your electron doesn't make it to you, that's unacceptable. It's human health and safety. Some of these things run, the devices that keep people healthy, alive, et cetera. So all of that's the perfect analogy, but the tolerance for messing up when you're dealing with delivering an electron that is running someone's, economy or life is zero or close to zero.
Here's the problem. When it comes to the electric grid, it's hard to know what to prioritize. There's even a term for it, the energy trilemma. The first part of the trilemma is about upgrading the infrastructure itself. Things like getting new energy sources connected to the grid, or maybe connecting something energy hungry like a hospital, a manufacturing plant, or a data center. But to give a sense of how deep this part of the problem is, imagine that I have built a new energy source. I'm all set, and I would like to plug it onto the grid. How long do you think I would have to wait to plug it onto the grid so that I can start getting paid?
Today, the wait to get permission to connect is around 7 years. Even though you can build it, you want to build it, you're ready to build it, you have the money and the land, you don't get permission to start doing that for 7 years. And that is where we are today.
That's pretty horrific.
It's what keeps me up at night.
The second part of the trilemma is the cost of large-scale improvements to the grid, and who pays for that?
We can't gold plate the grid, build everything immediately, and then all of us pay $10,000 a month for our electricity bill. That won't work.
And the third is reliability. It's not enough for the grid to be super efficient just some of the time. People need to be able to count on it 24/7, 365. So the grid is hard to upgrade because we need it to be affordable and to actually keep working. Remember, zero tolerance for messing up. So how do we think we could help? Usually at X, what we do to try and solve a problem is to have an idea for a solution and start prototyping. Start building stuff to figure out what works. But you can't prototype the grid. So Paige and the Tapestry team needed a different approach.
The green shoots for us were around partnerships and finding grid operators, people who are responsible for delivering energy, who wanted to go on a journey with us that was uncertain. So once someone says, yes, we want to work with you, then we say, great, let's start looking at what you've got. How do you manage your assets? Can you show us your model of your grid?
When you say a model, you mean where all the wires are, where all of the
your blueprint. Yeah, like show me the blueprint. And of course, everyone has that. But then everyone says, well, it's not really up to date. In this part over here, there was a big storm and it's not fully accurate yet, but we kind of know what's there. And I don't mean that these folks are being irresponsible, but that is the best they have. So their schematic is kind of accurate. And in the very beginning, we were like, well, we can't drive insights that help you figure out how to move an electron if we don't even know what's there or what state it's in, if it's plugged in or not.
But there's something that X, as a part of Alphabet, is uniquely suited to do. As a company, Alphabet has a long history of collecting geospatial information and making it useful. Think Street View, Google Maps, Google Earth. We have at our disposal Street View vehicles that can go out and collect specific information where it's missing.
We would go drive out in the field and look up in the sky and say, I'll be darned, there is a transformer there. I didn't know that.
By pulling multiple threads of data together, the grid operator's imperfect blueprint, our own geospatial data, other sources of publicly available data, and the actual facts about where electricity is managing to go, and combining it using our AI capabilities, meant Paige and the Tapestry team could offer something really useful to the operators.
Our Tapestry's team members said, I think I can help you figure out what your map is.
Think of it as Google Maps for electrons. And then once you have that, the real work can start.
One of the most helpful things that we've done is try to really simplify what are the things we're solving. And we've gotten this down to sort of three main things. When you're working on the electric grid, you are either managing your assets, meaning your stuff. I need to make sure my solar panel doesn't have dust on it and it's producing as much as I can, or I need to make sure my transformer's not rusting and we're good to go. So we do a lot of work making sure that folks who have assets connected to the electricity network are getting high performance out of that. That's managing your stuff.
Next is planning. How to simulate 2, 5, 20 years into the future to figure out what stuff you're going to need in order for new energy sources to be connected with minimal fuss.
So for your solar field in Arizona, we may be able to look at this great map that we now have and say, oh, good news, Astro. We looked at where you want to install it, and there is tons of capacity on that node, tons of space. We're not at risk of creating any issues at that spot. You know what? Go ahead. You don't have to wait. Or we might say, oh, Astro, I'm really sorry, but in order for us to connect your solar field, you're going to need to also put another line here.
So 1, managing your physical assets. 2, planning for the future. And the third essential consideration is optimizing, helping grid operators to make difficult, real-time decisions about how to manage their grid.
How am I going to get that grid operator to be able to make decisions about when to turn on and off a wind farm and whether they should use batteries? They need to run thousands of simulations in multiple scenarios instantaneously, assign a probability to that, fill in gaps, running optimizations, thinking about, would you want to dispatch this water to use on the grid today? Or would you want to hold it back because you had to water the fields next week? So that type of thinking is really beautiful and a great place for Tapestry to drive sort of system-wide improvements.
And a lot of that managing, planning, and optimizing simply would not have been possible without the recent massive progress in AI, giving operators the information they need to run a truly flexible, reliable grid system.
We think that deep AI and sharing information around the physics of the network, filling in data gaps, is how we're going to move, not in linear effectuation of change, but in transformational effectuation of change. And again, we talked about the interconnection queue. Could we take it from 7 years to months? Well, I always say to the team, how about minutes? How about I just say, hey, I'm ready to plug it in. And then we plug it, just like when I get a new TV at my house, I just plug it in and then I turn it on. Artificial intelligence that will allow on the other side of that a bunch of simulations to have been done and calculations to say, sure, go ahead and plug in. So I think that it is going to be one of the biggest tools that we have to unlock the power at the scale and the speed and across the globe to make better decisions.
One of the grid operators to work with Tapestry was CEN, the national grid of Chile. They had an ambitious goal that they needed to meet.
And we were talking about the strategies to operate a 100% grid based on renewables.
That's Juan Carlos Olmedo, the CEO of Chile's national grid. When he met Paige in early 2020, he told her he's been tasked by the government to phase out coal power by 2040.
We sort of looked around the room, and our team was pretty small then. We, started in kind of scrappy ways. It's like, do you guys think we could do an entire country and help them figure out how to model 20 years out and decommission coal? And we were like, we'll figure it out. Well, let's do it.
But Juan Carlos had an even more audacious challenge. He thought with Tapestry's help, they could meet the government's goal by 2030, 10 years to decommission coal and replace it with renewables. It was a big ask. And Chile has some unique challenges to deal with.
Compared with other grids that has a high share of renewables, is that our country is isolated from the countries that surrounding us.
This means Chile is almost like a power island. Without connections to other countries to ride the peaks and troughs in supply and demand, you have much less flexibility in your grid. Chile is also unique in its shape. There's no other country in the world like it.
The main grid has a length of 3,100 kilometers. That's very long. It's like going from Norway to Italy. And also it's very thin. The width of our country is not more than 200 kilometers. And we are very close to the ocean and to the mountains.
Picture a map of South America. With Peru to the north, Chile is a thin strip that runs all the way from the middle of the continent to the southern tip. The border to the east is the Andes, the longest mountain range in the world, and to the west is the Pacific Ocean. The south of Chile is a mass of islands and inlets. The north is arid. It's a country of extremes. And because of this, the distribution of its energy resources is not even.
In the northern part, we have one of the best solar radiation in the world that has a huge potential for solar generation. Also, in the southern part of the northern grid, there are good wind resources in the area that we call Taltal. We have good resources of wind also in the Patagonia, in the extreme south of the country.
But the demand for electricity is concentrated in the center, where most of the population of Chile actually lives. So it's a challenge. Electricity needs to be moved through a tight grid from north and south to the center.
And that's a key factor in the planning, because we need to develop new transmission facilities to connect the renewable resources to supply the demand.
Just like in the USA, getting a new source of electricity online takes a huge amount of work. Analyzing the grid to make sure it won't overload, to make sure electricity can be moved from where it's generated to where it needs to be, used to take a long time.
Well, previous to working with Tapestry, that analysis may take 3 to 6 months, because we have to run different software, analyze different cases, and we may omit some good solutions. We don't have any guarantee that it's the best solution that we select in that time framework of 3 to 6 months. And with the tool, it's more efficient because in a faster way, I mean, in one day, we can evaluate many alternatives in order to decide what's the better. We have more capacity to evaluate more alternatives in a faster way.
They've been an amazing partner. And so now, 3 years later, we have gone from prototype and experimenting and kind of working side by side to they are actually using our grid planning tool to determine their long-term investments for the 20 million people of Chile. And we're going to help them make the decisions that are, in that energy trilemma, low carbon, low cost, and high reliability.
Congratulations. That's really exciting.
Thank you. It's so you you're like, maybe someday. And then all of a sudden you look up and a whole country's saying, let's do this. It's working. Yeah.
Here at X, we know that taking moonshots is hard. To solve big problems, you have to be ready to take risks, to try big things, to really shoot for the moon. We have a saying here at X, we're looking for 10x, not 10%. Basically, we're not interested in solutions that only deliver marginal benefits. We're constantly looking for ideas that have truly transformative power, to make something 10 times better, more efficient, more powerful, more useful. With that kind of ambition, the possibility of failure is ever present. But by recognizing that and pushing forward anyway, you can maximize your chances of impact even far beyond your original goals. Because the ecosystem of innovation is so fertile, work done here at X, even on projects that are eventually stopped, has had positive ripple effects across technologies, taking on a life of their own. It's not easy, but our aim is to be comfortable with smart risks and having the intellectual honesty to recognize when any of those risks don't work out, because it's such a crucial part of innovation.
We are constantly co-creating together to celebrate and to develop this ability to be very hopeful, to be very audacious, but also to assess very realistically what the risks are in the bets that we're taking.
But we also know that to do big things, you have to get through the minutia, the grind of the unseen hard work, the small wins.
Hold on to the big, audacious thing that brings you to work every day and gets you so stoked. Because sometimes it feels too big. Where do I start? Or it's too small. It's not big enough. And then make sure that you can translate that into something that you're doing today and tomorrow and the next day and making progress on. We are a moonshot. We are going to the moon. I promise you, we have to tie our shoes. We have to put both legs of our pants on, and then we can work on getting to the moon. And we have to do both well.
And finally, some advice that is very close to my heart.
I say all the time, there's no rule that when you're working on hard things, you have to be serious. That's not in the rule book anywhere that I've seen so far. Have fun.
You've been listening to the Moonshot Podcast, a Blanchard House production for X, the Moonshot Factory. I'm your host and captain of Moonshots, Astro Teller. If you're enjoying the podcast, hit subscribe, leave us a review, and a rating wherever you listen. We're also on YouTube at X, the Moonshot Factory. Next time, we're diving into the future of wearable technology. We'll explore the next frontier in human-computer interaction. Don't miss it.
That's when we really believed that this idea of machine mediation of sound was possible.
Why not? This is stepping into the unknown, which to me is the ultimate creative act.
And it's like, is this the time now that after watching all these failed interaction attempts, is this the moment that it could break free?
Then I thought to myself, I didn't move across the Atlantic to not take risks.